everyone and welcome to day 4 of the Stitch Together project. Thanks again everyone who's been getting involved. I've loved seeing all your pictures coming through on the Facebook group. So today's day 4 and today we're going to be looking at chain stitch and lazy daisies, and you might also know that stitch as detached chain stitch, so that will all make sense in a minute. But yeah, thanks so much for sending all the photos through. Keep them coming. It's really good to see what you've all been getting up to and how the stitches are progressing. Like I said yesterday, if you guys do finish, feel free to start another one if you've got enough fabric. Yeah, you're more than welcome to. It's great to see everything that's been going on. And tomorrow I'm actually going to be sharing how you can display your embroideries in a postcard frame. So I mentioned that yesterday in my answer a question session. So if you're ready to finish and you want to display one already ready to send, then do tune in tomorrow. But yeah, so today we're going to be looking at chain stitch and lazy daisies. But before I do show you that, once again, scissors and needles are sharp, so please sew responsibly. And I'll just get started. Okay, so hopefully you can see that there. Now, as you can see, I've added a little bit more to my design. I've gone with back stitch on the text, and I've actually done 2 lines of back stitch on these letters here. I've not finished yet. And then I've also gone for seeding, might not be able to see that, but seeding in the little circle at the bottom of the hot air balloon. And I've added some straight stitches for the ropes in blue. Now before I begin sewing, I've noticed that my frame has become loose, as you can see. So what I'm going to do to start is just tighten the fabric once again, so that is nice and flat for when we start stitching. Okay, and I'll just tighten it by the screw, like so. Okay, so now we're ready to begin. So as I said, we're going to be looking at a chain stitch and a lazy daisy stitch. Now they're one in the same, and it will all make sense in a second, but I'll start with the chain stitch. And like I said before, it's all in the name. So this stitch looks like a chain, and that's it. That's all there is to it. So what I'm going to do is get my blue thread and take a length of my forearm. Oops. And again, I'm going to be working with 3 strands of thread in my needle at once. And I think I'm going to use this stitch in the centre section of the hot air balloon. If you're working on the flower design, you could maybe use this stitch to fill in one of the petals. Or if you're working on the lion design, you could use this stitch to maybe fill in the section on the nose. So if I just get the design, so yeah, so chain stitch could be done in one of the petals, or you could do it on the stem if you haven't filled that in already. This is a good stitch to use on this section of the nose if you haven't done that already, or around the eye. And again, you can use this stitch to stitch lines, or it could be used to fill in a shape. So I'm going to be filling in the middle section here. Okay, so I've got 3 strands of thread. I'm going to group them together, and then I'm going to thread my needle. So you could mix your colours for this stitch if you want to. It's up to you. And then tie a knot in the end. Okay, so what I'm going to do to begin with is bring my needle up through the back, but actually a little distance away from where I'm going to stitch, and I'll show you why in a minute. So I'm going to start my stitching here, but I'm actually going to bring my needle down, oh sorry, through the front, not through the back. So I'm going to bring my needle down here, so the knot sits on the front of the fabric. And this is just another method of starting your stitch. So I'll show you how this works as we go along. Okay, so chain stitch. My first stitch is going to start at the bottom of the shape, and I'm going to do 1 line of stitching all the way through the centre of this shape. Okay, so I've brought my needle up right at the bottom of the shape. Now this might not make sense, but I'm going to bring my needle back down in the same hole that I've just brought it up in. Okay, so obviously if I pulled this thread all the way through, the thread would come loose. So I'll try again. Bring my needle up, back down in the same hole. Okay, now the trick with this is not to pull the thread all the way through to the back, so I'm just going to rest it on the table for you to see. Oops. Okay, so I've got a little loop, don't know if you can see that, resting on the fabric. What I'm going to do next is bring my needle up where I want to start my next stitch. So about here, about 1/2 centimetre away from where I started. And I'm going to make sure the needle, oops, this one's a bit fiddly, the needle goes through the loop, okay? Like so. And I'm just going to pull that thread until that loop sits flat on the fabric. So hopefully you can see that. So that is my first chain. Okay, my next stitch, I'm going to bring my needle down in exactly the same hole as I've just brought it up in. Pull the thread so there's a loop on the fabric. Like so. And then bring my needle up where I want the end of that chain to sit. Make sure that the needle goes through the loop. Like so. This one's a bit fiddly to do. So you'll need 2 hands. And then pull it so that the chain lays flat on the fabric. You'll find if you pull it too hard, the chain will bunch up and it will just look like a straight line. So the trick is not to pull it so hard that it just looks like a line, but to pull it enough so that it's not loose. Okay? I'm going to start again. Now as you've seen, just as I pulled that there, the whole stitching came loose. And this is because you're stitching through the same hole. So there's actually nothing holding this stitch at the back. So you do just have to be careful not to let go of your stitches, otherwise it does come loose like that. So I'll start again and show you. Okay. So this one's a bit hard to get your head around, but actually the stitching is really simple. So bring your needle up, back down in exactly the same hole, create a loop, bring your needle up through that loop, make sure you pull the tail of your thread through so that doesn't get caught. This is the tail. Next stitch, bring your needle down, and then up. Make sure your needle goes through the loop, like so. Bring the needle down, create a loop. So every time you stitch, you're going through the same hole that you've just brought your thread up in, like so. Now I'm actually running out of thread quite quickly, so what I'm going to do is create one more stitch and just create an anchoring stitch over the end of this chain. So that just means I'm going to stitch one little stitch over the end of the loop, and that holds that chain in place. So that's not going to come loose now. So now I'm going to weave this bit of thread through the back of my stitches like we usually do. Oops. Okay. And I'm going to cut that away. Now I'm going to show you why I brought my knot down at the front here. So I'm first going to cut this knot away. Now this is a great technique for starting your thread if you don't want a knot on the back but you don't have any space to cover your stitches with. So you bring your knot down further away from where you're going to begin, do your stitching, and then once you've finished you cut the knot away, you grab hold of this bit of thread and you simply weave it through the back of your stitches. Now this thread seems to have got a little twist in it, so I'm just going to loosen it with my needle, like so, and then thread that through my needle and just weave this bit of thread through the back of my stitches again. And it doesn't matter what stitches you weave it through, just so long as it's secure. The trick with this technique is to make sure you leave a piece of thread that's long enough that you can actually weave it through. If you leave it too short, you will find that actually you can't get your needle through. So I'll just cut that away. Put that to one side. So we can start again with another bit of thread. Now as you can see, I didn't get very far with that stitch, so you might want to cut a bit of thread that's slightly longer than 30 centimetres. Or you can use the 3 little stitches anchoring technique to begin your stitching. Or you can leave your knot at the back, but the only reason I don't leave the knot at the back is because I'm bringing my needle back down in exactly the same hole that I bored it up in, and sometimes you end up piercing the knot and you get into a bit of a tangle. So that's the reason why I don't do that. Hi Amy, thanks for joining. Okay, so again, I'll bring my needle down further away from where I'm going to begin. So I'm going to begin here, bring my needle down here. Now to carry on this chain, all I'm going to do is bring my needle up at the end of that chain, inside the chain. I'm going to ignore that anchoring stitch because we're about to stitch over it. And I'm going to carry on as normal. So bring my needle back down in the same hole. Oops. And again, the trick is not to pull the thread so much that you lose your loop. Just try and get the tail out. Loop on top of the fabric. Needle up. Thread through the loop. Now I seem to have missed a piece of thread there. There we are. Got into a pickle. This is good to see because you can see that it's not completely straightforward, and you do have to be a bit more, you have to have a bit more concentration with this one, because when you've got loops on the top and thread underneath, it can get a bit complicated. So we'll try that one again. The trick with this one is to keep the tail quite short so it doesn't get tangled in your loops. Okay, so back down in the same hole, loop on top of the fabric, needle up through the loop, like so. Now what I'm going to do with this stitch is I'm actually going to do one line straight down the middle, and then I'm going to come back and start another line on this side, and I'll probably fit 2 or 3 lines in. I think when I get to here I might have to start my line here and finish it here just so the stitches fit, and then I'll come back and do the other side. And then that is that stitch done. So I'll do a couple more for you to see. And again, this is a great stitch to use instead of back stitch if you want a fuller line. Or alternatively, like I've done here, I've actually done 2 lines of back stitch. So again, if you want a fuller line, you can just double up. But here, I've actually only managed to fit 2 or 3 stitches in each line because obviously they're quite small. So again, that's fine. So I'm going to finish off my thread there. Turn it over. Pull out the mess. And then weave that through the back of my stitches. Okay, so that is a chain stitch. And next I'm going to teach you how to do a lazy daisy stitch. Now a lazy daisy stitch is sometimes called a detached chain stitch, and that's just because all you're doing is stitching one of the chains in the chain stitch line. And this is a great stitch for stitching petals, which is why it's called lazy daisy stitch, because it looks like a daisy petal. Okay, so I'll leave that there for now, and I'll come back to that later. So I think what I'm going to do is just a little flower here, just so you can see what I mean by lazy daisy stitch. And I've got some pink thread that I'm going to use for this. get a length, the length of my forearm. And again, I'm going to get 3 strands of thread for this. 1, 2, 3, it's actually 2 there. 3 strands of thread is always my preferred sort of amount to work with. That's just what I've developed over the years. But some people prefer to work with more, some people prefer to work with just 1. You just have to sort of see what works best for you. Okay, so again I'm going to bring my needle down further away. I'm going to create a flower just here. Okay, so sometimes you might want to draw the dot in of the centre of the flower. So I'll just draw it in pencil there. And what I'm going to do is create flower petals around that dot. So this is a lazy daisy stitch. So feel free to pause as we go if you're following along. So I'll bring my needle up just at the edge of the dot. And again, just like with the chain stitch, I'm going to bring my needle back down in exactly the same hole. But I'm not going to pull my thread all the way through. So like you can see, I've got a loop on top. Now wherever you bring your needle up will determine how long the petal is going to be. So I think I'm going to bring it up about here. And again, like before, make sure the needle goes through that loop. Pull it flat. Again, don't pull it too tight, otherwise the loop will close. And then all you do is stitch over the top of that loop with an anchoring stitch, like so. And that is your daisy petal. Now I've made that stitch quite long, so it's a bit obvious. But what you could do is angle your needle under the loop, so you can't really tell where that stitch is. And then I'm going to turn my hoop around and start the next petal. So again, bring my needle up where I want the base of the petal to sit. Bring my needle back down in the same hole. Back up where I want the end of the petal to sit, making sure that needle goes through that loop. Pull it flat and then stitch over the end. So this time I'll angle my needle underneath. So hopefully you'll be able to see it less. Not quite. Try again. Next one. Needle up. Down in the same hole. Up where I want the petal to end. And then stitch over the end. Now as you can see, I've pulled that a little bit too tight, so I think I'm going to take that one out. Just lift it with your needle. I always use the end of my needle to do unpicking. If I use the sharp end, then sometimes I can stab the thread and split it, whereas if I use the eye of the needle, then I'm less likely to split that thread. So if I just pull that now, that stitch is going to come undone. And I can just loosen the thread from the back. Just find out which one it is. Rethread and start again. Bring the needle up through the loop, pull it flat, and then stitch over the end, like so. So that is a lazy daisy stitch, really simple. And next week I will be showing you how to do French knots, which are perfect for the inside of flowers and just for adding detail. So I'll post a schedule at the weekend just to show you what we're going to be covering next week. And I think I might have got a bit confused here. No, we're all good. How to talk and stitch at the same time. Do one more. And then we'll have our flower. And if you wanted to have a petal with a sort of open base, all you would do is make sure that you, instead of stitching in the same hole that you've just brought your thread up in, you stitch slightly further away. So the stitch will actually look open. I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. So for example, if I get another piece of thread, like so, I'll just do an example on the top and then I'll take that out. So I could bring my needle up and then back down slightly further away, so not in the same hole. Okay, create a loop. Make sure my needle goes through that loop and then create a stitch like that. And obviously that's an open petal base. So it's up to you what you want to do. You might want to mix them up as you go. I'll just take that out. And then there's one last thing that I want to show you, which is how I add definition to petal shapes. So sometimes petals, they change colour. So you could mix your colour as you go. Or what I sometimes do is I get one strand of thread in a contrasting colour. So this is an orange. Might not show up. Let's get a green because that might show up a little bit better. So I take one strand of thread in the green, thread up my smaller needle, oops, and then start your thread in whatever way you prefer. I might weave this through the back of my stitches, this one. So I'll just weave this through the back of my stitches. And obviously I've got loose thread here, so I wouldn't recommend you leave your tails loose, but just for the purpose of this explanation, I'll just leave them. And then all you do is stitch seeding stitches over the end of the petals. So this helps add a little bit of definition to the petal shape. Okay, so I've gone up inside the petal at the end, and I'm going to create one seeding stitch over the end of the petal. Up inside the shape, one seeding stitch over the end of the petal, and again with the others. And this just adds a little bit of definition to your shape. Sometimes it's quite nice to have pale petals and then a really dark accent over the end of the shape. Now this shape, I don't think I pulled the thread tight enough. It might have twisted, so you can see it's sort of a bit messy. So what you can do, turn your hoop over and just use the back of your needle to just pull on the threads that are loose, and hopefully that should allow the shape to lay a bit flatter on your design. Bring the needle up, over, and you've created a little accent. So yeah, so that's all there is to it. We've got chain stitch and we've got detached chain stitch, which is also known as lazy daisy. If you've got any questions about those, feel free to just drop me a comment. And yes, so tomorrow I'm going to be covering how to display your embroideries on a postcard ready to send. So do tune in if you're interested in that. And then next week we'll be covering even more stitches. So feel free to just experiment, have a go, add to your design wherever you like, and just make it your own. Thanks so much.